The kids is the part that really impacts me. Is when you can just kind of see them just kind of closed off and just the anger and the stuff like that. And then at the end of the day, when we go through and we celebrate the new identity that they've created for themselves, they're like light bulbs. They're just lit up and just so energetic. I mean, there again, more of the goosebumps kind of stuff. That I couldn't charge enough to get the feeling that I get when seeing that's what it's all about.
Unlost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Mark Papadas, affectionately known as the Be Great Guy. Mark is the visionary behind I Am for Kids, a groundbreaking program empowering children through personal development. After navigating family illness and marital challenges, Mark reignited his lifelong mission at the age of 59. Today, Mark's vision impacts countless kids and families, transforming education and empowerment from the inside out. Mark, welcome to Unlost Cause.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know we're going to go into really great detail as to what I Am for Kids is, but can you just level set for the audience in 2 or 3 sentences? What is I Am for Kids?
So I Am for Kids is personal development for kids and families. So I'd say if you have to describe it in one sentence, imagine Tony Robbins meets Charlie Brown.
I love it. I love it. And then in terms of that personal development, is it like courses? Is it camps? Is it books or a combination?
It's a little bit of everything. So really what I Am for Kids is it's a brand. Okay. So, I'm not too proud to say that we're basically stealing the Muppets business model. So it's the characters that are the star. And so we're launching our first TV show, which is the world's first animated reality-based TV show for kids. And it's real stories of real kids, most of which who have gone through the I Am for Kids school program, which already exists. It's piloted in 37 schools in 9 states and got some really good results. So we're bringing that personal development, putting it into entertainment for kids. And then what makes us different from anybody else in the industry is we are then offering live online and eventually in person personal development training for the entire family.
And since you're focused on kids, share with the audience, what was your childhood like growing up?
I mean, I would say for the most part, it was, a normal kid. If you had to, say put us in a socioeconomic, I'd say we grew up upper, lower class. So, both my parents worked. I was usually in the care of my 2 older brothers. I never missed a meal, got to play Little League, but, a lot of the clothes were like from the secondhand store, that kind of stuff, right? As I and my brothers got older, while my parents were working, I did have one of my brothers who basically used to beat the snot out of me on a fairly regular basis. So that was challenging, and there was really nobody there to help me, who could help me, I think, because I'm the youngest by 6 years. So, that's a big difference. It's not like somebody's a year older and you can kind of defend yourself.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So, so it was challenging, but, I guess to say it was normal for the time, maybe is probably the best way of putting it.
And when you look back on your childhood, Mark, was there any inkling or seeds that were planted that relate to what you are doing today?
I think so. I think in that by nature, I've discovered that I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, right? And not that I necessarily knew when I was 8 years old that that's what I wanted to do. But it's funny, when I got into high school and you start talking about with your guidance counselors about what you want to do for a living, et cetera. And I had said, I think I want to go into teaching. And it was kind of funny because they're all like, no, you don't. It's like, what? Yeah, there's not a lot of money in teaching. It's pretty much a thankless job. It's like, find something, do something else. Like, okay, these people I trust and respect. Okay, they tell me don't do that. So I, went to college for business courses, and I basically majored in marketing. But everything that I've done since then, even in the professional business setting, I was always training people and managing people and teaching them. And that's when I realized that was my it's what I was meant for. It's my calling. It's just my nature.
Wonderful. And this calling around training and mentoring people, did you have some role models when you were growing up, be it a teacher, a parent, or a family friend that you really looked up to that you still remember some of those moments with?
I'd say there's a handful. Needless to say, there's a lot of teachers, none of which, some of which I couldn't even remember their names today, unless I pulled out the class picture kind of thing. But there were a handful of teachers who definitely made me strive to be the best I could be. I was fortunate enough I was in the gifted programs when I was in elementary school. So generally speaking, you got the better quality teachers. Been an athlete my entire life, so I had a couple coaches, in particular one in Little League that I still remember Mr. Tanaka to this day from the Mighty Mites League. And he was just a really good teacher and calm. And, I learned a lot from him, not just about baseball, but just how to interact with everybody. When I got to high school, I had a really good coach there. He was a little bit more on the, the old school kind of stern style, but definitely did learn a lot in terms of discipline and things of that nature. And it wasn't really until I probably hit, like 18, 19, 20 years old when I started into the world of quote unquote personal development, of developing my whole self as opposed to a specific skill or something that I was trying to learn.
Well, shout out to all the wonderful coaches and teachers out there that touch so many lives. I've had my fair share, and it sounds like you've had as well. And then growing up, what about on the entrepreneurial side? Did you have any entrepreneurial role models from family, friends, relatives, or anyone that you saw that you're thinking like, I may want to do something entrepreneurial down the road?
Actually, when I was young, when I was a child, there would be a definitive no. As a matter of fact, the only uncle that I had who was entrepreneurial in spirit, everybody thought he was weird. Okay. We were taught, and even as I, started to become successful in business later, the overarching view was that security was getting a job, going to work for a company, work for them for 30, 40 years, retire kind of stuff. And I was always like, that's not security because they can pretty much fire you at any time. I'd rather say, if I fail, it's because I failed and I messed up and I can learn and I can go back and try and do better. But if the company I'm working for fails, right, then we're all out of work. Then what?
So then you listen to your teachers and your guidance counselor to say, Mark, don't be a teacher. There's no pay in there. Go do something different. So you ended up studying business courses and marketing. So then help me understand, after you graduate, what were some of the sequences or what jobs or roles did you take thereafter?
I always say I have a knack for getting jobs that I'm not qualified for. Okay. So my first job was actually in the health and fitness industry. It was for a company before Bally's bought them out way back in the 80s. Okay. But I worked for them for about 6 years. That one, I guess you could say I was qualified for because I was always an athlete. I was fit. I actually got the job by walking in and saying, hire me. And they kind of liked the gumption that came with that. And so they hired me, and I worked my way up to being the operations manager of the biggest club in their chain. But it's one of those things where during that time I got married and I was having so much fun doing it. I was like, this can't be a career, right? I should probably start adulting and go get a quote unquote real job. And so I left there and I went to work in the specialty chemical industry. Okay. So I lovingly say that the division that I worked for, we sold anything that killed anything. So we sold professional like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides. So we were calling on like your pest control operators, your golf courses, deck builders, things of that nature. And I was with them for close to 10 years. It was very successful at that, taking the sales and marketing and taking my little division and starting to build it up. I'm proud to say that over the 10 years I was there, we actually tripled the size of the territory, even though some of the geography got pulled away. And then from there, I was recruited to go into technology. I actually went to work for the first company that did online data storage. So if you use a Google Drive or Dropbox or any of those types of services, I went to work for the gentleman who actually invented the technology. Unfortunately for him, there was a timing and funding issue. We were about to close on our second round of funding when 9/11 happened, and everything just basically shut down. So the company wound up having to shut down, and they wound up having to sell the technology. So unlike being a multi-hundred times millionaire, the guy's unfortunately kind of like the rest of us in terms of, doing well, but not like he could have, kind of thing. And then from there, that's when I decided that that's when the entrepreneurial really kicked in. And it's like, I'm going to go work for myself. So I started my own consulting company. So I was doing a lot of sales training. I've been a glutton for personal development ever since I got into it. So I was also taking sales training and combining that with personal development training for grownups. And that was until I had my epiphany, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit. It was a night that still gives me goosebumps every time I talk about it, because it was that powerful. And then from there started what was the nonprofit of I Am for Kids, which is where the school program came from. There's a whole story about most of our funding came from grants that wound up drying up when the state of Illinois went through a very deep financial crisis back in the early 2010s, I guess is what you would call that decade. And went back to work in the health and fitness industry and then basically after my divorce, I moved completely out of state, about literally across the country. So from Chicago to Orlando, and that's when I decided I'm going all Texas Hold'em. All the chips are in on the table. I'm going after what is my life's mission and my purpose for being.
Oh, great. And before we do dive into that, you did mention that you started going down this track of personal development around high school-ish or college time period. And then you also mentioned that you're doing your own consulting. Your first kind of foray into the entrepreneurial world was personal development and sales training. What is it about personal development that seems to be a theme or a through line for you?
To me, it was the impact that it had on me. So before I knew, there's one of the things that I've learned in all this study is that there's within certain people, there are traits and characteristics and talents that are just innate. They just have them. Okay. They're not within everybody, but majority of them can be taught. So I can learn something that you just, no problem. I probably won't be able to ever do it as good as you, but I can learn to be at the very least passable, if not very good at it, kind of thing. Right. And especially when we're talking about, my ex-wife knows that my baseball was my first love. Okay. So everything that always kind of revolved about, I wanted to get better at baseball. And there were some things that I learned just in terms of being able to concentrate and how to use my mind to get my body to do what it needed to do to be effective on the baseball field. And then I started to get into some of the OGs of personal development, like you're talking about, like Zig Ziglar, and Brian Tracy, both of which I've been fortunate enough earlier in my career to share a stage with. One of my favorites to this day is Earl Nightingale, who's literally probably, him and Zig Ziglar were probably like the first ones who actually did it and, made a name for themselves doing that. I've done the Tony Robbins Firewalk several times. So it's like, I if it's something to learn, like I can't tell you the last novel that I read. Okay. I don't read for entertainment. I read for information. And that's, if it's out there, I want to devour it.
Well, we'll come back to that about some of your favorite books to share a little bit later. But so, no, that's fantastic. And you mentioned one of the things that really drew me when we were going back and forth initially was this epiphany that you had. And it was so vivid that I read it multiple times. So please share with the Unlost Cause audience, like this epiphany related to your son it sounds like with the first spark of this lost cause that you turned into an unlost cause started.
Just thinking about it, can you see the goosebumps?
Yeah.
So literally just going back to that night, it was like an out of body experience. Okay. So the time my youngest child, my son, was playing youth football. So at the end of the season, a bunch of the coaches just got together at a local establishment, just, having a couple beers, sharing some camaraderie. And one of my son's coaches just walks over to me and he starts going off on this positive rant about my son. He'd be saying, like, anytime I get a chance to get little Peppy on my team, because we didn't have first names. I was Big Peppy. My son was Little Peppy. Okay. He's like, I'm going to take him. He's just a great kid. He's coachable. He's a leader. The kids follow him and they listen to him. And he's just saying all these great things. And then I did something that we've all done, but we never admit to, is while he was talking, I kind of mentally checked out of the conversation. And I just remember thinking to myself, so wouldn't it be great if everybody could have these types of conversations about their kids? It's like, what can I do about that? And then I realized he was still talking. So I kind of shook it off and I actually re-engaged in the conversation. But I know that was the spark for what happened later that night. So said, the evening ends, I go home and I get in bed and I'm in that stage of sleep, before you hit REM. And it was literally just like a lightning bolt came through. I just woke up, I was wide awake. And it's like, dummy, this stuff. All you have to do is take what you're teaching to adults and put it into a format that'll engage and entertain kids. And, you can literally change the world, because adults, when you're working with them on this stuff, you have to break through so much baggage. You literally oftentimes have to cause a great deal of pain in their psyche to get them to change. Kids haven't developed that yet. So if you can just plant that seed right in the fertile soil, you'll have the longest lasting impact, because it'll last them for the rest of their lives. And they won't have to deal with that pain and that baggage. And it was literally, it's like in the movies, with the light shining through the, kind of thing. It started to just download into my head. And unlike those times where we've had those great ideas and you'll write them down in the morning and the morning comes and you have no idea, you just remember that it was great. Like I said, I was so energized. I just got up, I went downstairs, I got out a legal pad and I just started writing. And it just kept coming to me in terms of, well, how are you going to do that? Okay, well, animation is going to be one of the most effective ways to be able to do it with kids. Okay, what are the characters going to be like? And who are the real kids that I know? It's like, okay, boom, 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 boom. Started taking it all the way through. And I'd say probably 70% of what I Am for Kids is becoming today came from that night, is on that legal pad.
Unbelievable. And do you still have that legal pad with you somewhere?
I do. It's in a bookcase that I've got back here, because I still do refer back to it, not so much for the inspiration part of it, but just to make sure that I'm not forgetting something that was, because I often refer to that as a divine download. Divine download.
I like that. And then what was it? You talk about these other coaches were just heaping praise on a 9-year-old son. And did you, and I know that, some of it's learned behavior, well, probably a lot of it's learned behavior and some of that's like DNA and genetics. Like, what did you do as a parent that set him off on that course that other people observed and said, oh my goodness, that kid's a little bit different and I like the way he's wired? Like, tell me a little bit about the parenting style that you have that brought out the best in your son.
I've taught this stuff to my kids when they were in the womb. Okay. So literally from the time that they could literally just hear my voice, I was going through and trying to, to at least not so much teach them, but to at least start getting them prepared for those types of things. And that's one of the reasons, like, so if my kids are all grown now, but one of the things I'm proudest to say is that even if they weren't my kids, I'd want to be their friend, because they're just really cool people. And one of the biggest compliments I ever got, I don't think my daughter ever actually realized it, but so my oldest, she used to play club volleyball and travel all around the Midwest playing volleyball. And there was a tournament that I couldn't make, and she was in a, it was like the last game for the championship of this particular tournament, and she was serving for it, and she noticed that she was nervous. And I remember she was telling the story. She's like, well, like what would Dad tell me to do? And then she's like, okay. So she started to change her breathing. She got calm, and she went boom, and they wound up winning the point. And they wound up winning the championship. So to me, that's the things that those are the victories, right? So it's when you can just teach them how to think as opposed to what to think, right? We're never going to be there for every bad situation, nor do we want to be, right? One of the things I say in my book is that we should be, there's a lot of parents who they think it's their job to be a shield, right? To keep anything from getting to that child. And I disagree with that. I think we should be more of a filter. There's some stuff that you want to let through, right? You want them to fail a little bit, right? You don't want them to be injured or anything like that, but you want them to have some adversity so that they can learn how to overcome it. If they never face adversity, when they get onto the real world, then what?
And how much of these like life lessons were part of that divine download that came to you? Or was the divine download more about like, hey, how to structure it, the vision, and then the details were about, these life lessons about how do you teach it or how do you animate it or bring these lessons to life?
I think they're intertwined, kind of like DNA, because they helix back on each other. Because I don't think if I hadn't learned some of the strategies, that download would have been able to, the Big Bang wouldn't have happened, right? The right combination of gases wouldn't have been there. It would have just been a kind of thing, right? So most of, like when I talk about it in my book, the 10 secrets to empower kids and awaken the child in you, a lot of them they're not revolutionary, but I think what makes it revolutionary is the combination of how they're put together.
When you just share that example of your daughter serving for the winning point in her volleyball tournament, and she could feel her anxiety and nerves coming up, and she mentally thought, what would dad say? And it was around controlling the breathing, and then she did that. That's pretty remarkable. So did you teach these life lessons to your kids more haphazardly, and whenever you picked up a tip at a conference, you pass that along? Or did you actually have some structure or plan that you said, well, I'm going to teach this, then this? Or how do you think about that? Or how did you think about that?
It was as the situations arose, whichever the proper conjugation of that verb is. So yeah, it was always when something happened, and then I would ask, okay, so like, what just happened? How do you feel about that? What do you think brought that on? Right. And then when I got those answers, like, okay, here's how we can fix that. Right. And one of the things, it's funny, going back to that same football season, I used to hear parents be like, how the heck does he do that? Because I had this trick of being able to get the kids to stop crying almost instantaneously. And it's literally just by changing how they're breathing, right? Because everybody knows that if you change how you breathe, you change how you feel. So they'd be like bawling their eyes out, and I would go through my little 10-second thing with them, and then it'd be like, okay, and they're ready to go, right? And it always kind of got a kick out of one time at like one of the after the season parties for the team, a little cookout kind of thing, where I heard a couple of dads talking. I was like, how the hell does he do that? I don't know. I can never get him to do that.
And then when you had this lightning bolt epiphany and your son was 9, how old were you at that time?
Now I got to do the math. 45?
45. Okay. And then the reason why I asked is just the timeline, because then you end up sharing this with your then wife. And what was her initial reaction to, I mean, I'm sure you were brimming with excitement and talking fast and blah, 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 gesticulating. So what was her reaction to that?
Originally, so to kind of give a little bit of backstory to that, is she was one of those people, like I said, like my parents and stuff like that, about where you get your security. So she was never a big fan of the entrepreneurial, spirit in me, because when you're an entrepreneur, you have ups and downs. You don't have just steady across the board. And she likes steady across the board. So when I told her about what everything was about, if I remember correctly, this might not be verbatim, but it's pretty darn close. This might be, how she put it, something like, I think this is your first harebrained idea that has a chance to work, or something like that. Right? You know what I mean? So she wasn't like, no, that's dumb, because, I've yet to meet somebody who is against the mission of I Am for Kids. Okay. But her worry was that, how is this going to lead to security for us? Right. So when I decided that basically that night of that epiphany, that's when I decided that I'm going to be working with kids for the rest of my life. That's what I'm devoting it to. So I literally shut down my adult training business that night. Okay. I fulfilled contracts that I had, but I said it was that powerful. It's like, I can't not go after this. I can't go after this half-assed kind of thing. So I started to reach out to people who I knew and respected, both from a business standpoint, but then also I'm a very external person where I get my certainty from. So like, I have an idea and I'll think it's a great idea, but I'll ask somebody else first. And if they agree, then it's like, okay, no, I know it was a great idea. Okay. So I reached out to some psychologists and, a number of different experts in the field and said, what do you think? And they're like, this is amazing. You have to follow this. So we started a nonprofit. It was called the I Am for Kids Foundation. And the biggest part that came from that epiphany was that school program that it's designed to sit on top of the curriculum taught in 2nd through 5th grade. And it teaches the kids the key to every single one of us, as far as I'm concerned, is our identity statement. In other words, our I am ... Okay, because how you finish that literally decides how you live your life. It's the standards you hold yourself and other people to. It's like I said, it's your identity.
Just real quickly, Mark, on the I am statement, what's an example of one? Is it like super long, or is it supposed to be really short and punchy?
Ideally, I don't know about super long, but as with anything in life, that the power, the difference is in the distinctions. Okay, so a lot of times, to give you an idea, so the 5-step program the 5 steps that I teach, they're the same 5 steps, whether you're a child or whether you're an adult. Okay. So I guess you could say I did the I Am for Kids program with adults for about 10 years. Okay. Obviously, how you teach it is completely different. But the very first step is that you write your I am statement. So they're just given a blank sheet of paper, just says I am on the top of it. And they say, okay, go ahead and finish that off. And kids, adults, doesn't matter. Hands go up. Right. What are you looking for? How do you want me to do? And it's like, there's no right or wrong answer. Just you can write it. You can write it, make it a song. If you want to draw a picture, whatever. No right or wrong answer. So with the adults, over 80% of the time, they would answer with either their name and or their occupation. Neither of which has anything to do with, like I said, with who you are as a person, right? One's a label that you were given by your parents when you were born, right? And the other thing is what you do to put food on the table. And very few people are fortunate enough, like me, to be able to do what they're passionate about, right? The scary part was when we did the pilot program in the schools. So kids, by nature, answer things in one-word answers, right? How was school today? Good. Right? Okay. So we expected that. But the scary part was that slightly over half the time, that one-word answer was a negative trait or characteristic. And the 3 most popular in that 50% were I am fat, I am stupid, or I am ugly. So that's where you're saying is that if you haven't decided for yourself, if you haven't come up with your I am statement, you have one. It's just the loudest voices that are in your orbit are what is determining that. So what we do is we teach the kids how to develop and decide for themselves who they are starting right now. And that's the great thing about your identity is it's going to change as you grow, but it's going to still start off at that base, and you can always tweak it. Everybody's changes, and that'll take you through the rest of your life. But where it'll have the biggest impact is if we're starting in that 2nd through 5th grade area, because generally speaking, I don't care if you're in the worst neighborhoods that there are anywhere in the country, the kids usually get a pass until they're around middle school, right? You just don't mess with little kids. Okay. So if we can get to them to where they get that identity, and that's solid, right? Because it's human nature for us to want to be a part of something that's bigger than just ourselves.
That was one of my follow-up questions, Mark, was why does I Am for Kids target 2nd to 5th grade? And it sounds like it was very intentional because it's before their identities may have been fully formed and you're harder on them because they're in middle school, but they're old enough to have the cognitive function to understand and process some of this.
Exactly. That's roughly around 2nd grade is when the cognitive thought process starts, and they can start to really understand the difference between, A, yes, and no. Like a lot of people don't realize that toddlers don't understand when you tell them not to do something. The word "not" literally doesn't hit in the brain. So if you say, don't do this, and then you notice that they go and do that right away, it's because they didn't hear the "not." They heard you tell you to go do the thing you didn't want them to do, kind of stuff, right? So they're also developing the concept of consequences, that if they do something good or something bad may happen. So that's why we chose 2nd through 5th grade.
Yeah. And then I also wrote down the three adjectives that, fat, ugly, and stupid, right? And I'm like, wow, that like is super moving and unnerving at the same time. So is that because do you think it's mainly because it's external forces like a parent or bullying or someone saying like you're fat, you're ugly, and they just kind of internalize it because they're malleable at that age? Or like what is it that creates such a preponderance of concentration on those three words?
I would say it's what you just said plus a little bit more. And that unfortunately for the younger kids of today, there's so much more, they're bombarded. There's more access to things that they just didn't have when you and I were that age, and even when my kids were that age, right? So there is and it might not even be, it's a couple different things. So it could just be like a brother. It's like, hey, dummy, right? Kind of stuff. Just not doing it with malice, but just being a big brother kind of thing, right? You know what I mean? There's that part of it. There it is, especially when you're talking about the I'm ugly piece of it, right? There's all these filters and stuff like that these images that they're exposed to that are defined as beauty, right? And if they recognize that I don't look like that, they could be beautiful, but they don't look like what that image is, then I must be ugly, right? And I would say everybody's got their flavor kind of thing, but in my opinion, what is probably the biggest one is the example that the parents set. In other words, how many times even joking around do you hear somebody say, like, oh man, I feel like such a fat pig. I need to lose like 20 pounds, right? And they're just saying that either jokingly or they do feel that way. But then the kid hears that, or they might hear, instead of talking about themselves, they might hear them talking about somebody else that way, right? Can you believe how big so-and-so's gotten, right? That kind of thing. So these are the people that the kids look up to. These are the role models. So if they talk about themselves and other people that way, they're naturally that's going to have a bigger impact on them, even more so than the picture of Kim Kardashian or something like that.
And then, so you're putting your heart and soul into, now your life mission is to work with kids, coach them, mentor them, and, get them in this positive mindset, this positive journey. Now that takes a lot of time in the professional world. So, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier, so what is happening in the, in the family unit between you and your wife while you're, focused on this? She wants security. This is obviously not as secure as working for maybe a large company. So what is going on in that backdrop?
Well, there were problems, and there were it was more so than just this, but this certainly did not help. Okay. When we get divorced, we were married for over 35 years. So, it wasn't a fly by night. It's like, oh, we made a mistake, kind of thing. We raised three great kids. Something I used to say, like if I was giving a toast or something like that, I would say it as a joke, but the math wound up working out pretty spot on. Was, I would talk about, my lovely wife, and I said, we've been married for 26 years, and she's given me 18 of the happiest years of my life. And I would say that as a, to get a laugh. But as it turns out, over time, the relationship just wasn't what it was. And I'll kind of leave it at that because I don't want to get into too much detail on that. But within the family, to this day, we're all still close. My ex and I, not so much. We only talk when we need to, but we respect the others when, with their time with the rest of the family. So, yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think the where I was going with a bit more, Mark, is when you responded is like, she mentioned that, hey, this is a great idea, but we could never make it happen, right? So in talking about like the I am or the kind of affirmation visualization, that's almost a flip of this positive like energy that's just like bristling from you. So that was what I was looking more for, is like, oh, what? Because, I've seen it where these big things, because these are big things to embark, to turn a lost cause into a lost cause, brings couples together. And I've also seen it where it pushes them apart. And so when you're so excited about this, and then she remarks like, hey, this is great, but I don't know if we can ever make this happen. How do you kind of start reconciling that?
Part of that is, I guess you could say I probably never did. And what I mean by that is, I say this jokingly, but it's spot on true, is that if you ever get into a fight with me, you're going to have to kill me, because I will not give up, right? You may knock me out, but when I wake up, I'm going to come looking for you, kind of thing, right? So even, all the number of people who were naysayers and just like, just go do something else, don't worry about that. You're thinking way too big. You can never make that happen. I was like, again, I maybe kept to myself, but it's like, no, I'm pretty sure I can. So it's, and also maybe to a certain extent, maybe even that made me want to do it even more.
Got it. And then you said that you like external validation. So when you had this idea, you started talking to, counselors and other people. So I think this is also very important for the unlost cause community because I think some people just jump sometimes too soon because it's in their head and they think everyone thinks this way, right? But you took a very measured approach. Can you go into a bit more detail about how you vetted it to make sure like, hey, this isn't just me, but this is a lot of other people think this. So that's open the gate for me to invest more time and resources against this.
I don't think it was purposely measured. I think the biggest part of that was just looking for the validation of the idea from people who I trusted and respected, and I purposely asked people who were not as into personal development as I am, because to me it's like isn't everybody, right? I can't tell you how many times when I came up with the line that Tony Robbins meets Charlie Brown, there's more than a handful of times where somebody will say, "Who's Tony Robbins?" And I, even if you're not in the industry, it's kind of like saying, who's Tom Cruise, kind of thing, right? In my mind, but apparently not. So now it's like, oh, okay. And I kind of explained to them. And then usually what I wind up having to go to is like, would you ever see Shallow Hal? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, that's the guy in the elevator. And like, oh, okay, banana hands. And then they get who he is and at least what the concept is from there. But then again, if the people don't know who Tony Robbins is or Charlie Brown, they're not my market anyway.
So you found this target where you said, hey, I'm going to layer my approach of I Am for Kids on top of the curriculum taught in 2nd to 5th grade. So how did you go about integrating with the curriculum and the teachers? Because I know can be very regulated. Did you go to private schools, or is it after school programs, or how did you start, wedging into that opportunity?
Well, that was my absolute biggest surprise, in that, so the teachers and social workers I knew from schools that I took it to, like this is amazing. So you don't wait till it's perfect, start putting something together now. So we need this kind of stuff, right? I was shocked at the adversarial relationship between the schools and the administrations. It's literally, it's almost like today's political world, to where if you like something, I can't like it. Yeah, I might like it, but I can't like it, kind of thing. It's like every teacher that I took to, like, this is amazing. I want to put this in my classroom, but the administration will never go for it. So then every time I went to like a school district, they're like, yeah, this is great. And I'd already checked to make sure that it meets all the social, emotional learning standards and stuff like that. So it's not like they had to vet it, they could just go ahead and use it. And they're like, yeah, but the union will fight you on it. So I found out, I wound up having to either do one of two things. I tried to be the mediator, where I could talk to each of them and say, well, they already agreed. Okay, well, they already agreed, and be like, okay, well, then let's go ahead and do that kind of thing, right? The part that it was really, that was the most surprising part. I was really shocked at how that happened. And from that point, that's when we were kind of like, okay, we're going to have to start to think bigger, because we're not going to be able to get to enough kids as possible. So part of that divine download was how it was done. So at the time, it was all based on DVDs and workbooks. And it's me interacting with the 5 core I Am for Kids characters. And each one of them acts and reacts in ways that we know that certain percentages of the kids in each classroom think and feel. Okay. So now when the Nika character says something and that 25% of the kids feel the same way. Now they're okay, I'm not a weirdo. I'm not a freak for thinking that way. Okay. I'm not the only one. So that's part of how we did all that. And the reason why we put it on top of the curriculum is not just, it's literally designed to, like water, to permeate down into the curriculum. So the best two examples that I can think of are, one is American history. Okay. So even to this day, most adults, if you ask them anything about Abraham Lincoln, they're going to just rattle off a list of things like, he was really tall and wore a funny hat, freed the slaves, 16th president, got assassinated, is on the penny and the $5 bill, right? And that's pretty much what you're going to get from most people. But when you're teaching about Lincoln and you've got that I am basis that the kids are learning or have learned and are implementing every day, you can start to ask them, it's like, so what type of identity do you think that Lincoln had? Half the country was willing to go to war and leave the Union over slavery. He could have just as easily said, the heck with them, right? Let's keep the Union together. But he didn't, right? So, how do you think that he felt? What do you think he was thinking, right? So now all these historical figures, they actually become people that they can kind of step into and be like, okay, yeah, I see that, kind of thing. And that's when you really can have the impact. And the other big impact that we noticed was in what is now called language arts. Back in my day, it was English class, right? It's your vocabulary, et cetera. And when kids start to talk about, they want to, I always say not so much what they want to be, but what they want to do when they grow up. And a lot of want to be musicians. They want to, be things of that nature. You go into certain areas, they want to be rappers. So I would basically bring up to them, it's like, well, think of the best rappers that you like, right? Do they just use the same words over and over again? Or do they have some really cool lyrics that's like, wow, that was cool, and then it made you even possibly go and look up that word, right? So if you want to be successful in that, you're going to need to pay attention now in English class, right? You're going to need to learn how to, what words mean, how to use them, how to put them together. And I can't tell you how many letters I got from teachers going, you cannot believe people asking for extra spelling words the week or two after you came and talked at the school, kind of thing. So that's kind of the whole concept behind it is everything is designed to permeate and to get down to the core of each person.
When you were sharing about that Lincoln example, like which character he is and how would he think about it, it just flashed back to when you were talking about your daughter and the volleyball tournament and how you really want to teach her how to think versus what to think because she problem solved herself. And, this is, I can see the kind of the linkage between that and Lincoln and teaching them how to think, putting yourselves in the other person's shoes and then understanding their motivations and, deconstructing it as well. And then you mentioned that you have this book, The 10 Secrets. How does the book play into the I Am for Kids curriculum? Do they play off of each other? Or are they different? Or what are the similarities?
So the book is actually for the adults. Okay, so it's really designed for the parents and for the teachers, mostly for the parents. So basically what we did back then was we'd find out how many classrooms there were. We didn't know how many workbooks to send. And then we also have, the book is both in English and in Spanish. So we would ask, how many families, right? Because we don't need to send, if they have 3 kids, they don't need 3 books, right? They just need 1 for the family. How many books do we need to send in which language? Okay. So what this does is the parents want this for the kids, right? And if the kids are doing it and they're really getting into it, and they're going to be like, so mommy, what's your I am statement? Right? And mommy goes, I don't have one, right? Kind of thing, because I'm not going to use the bad language, but kids are the best BS detectors in the world. Okay. They know when you're BSing them. So this was basically my way of the initial way of getting the I am statement to the families, to the entire family. So the first half of the book is actually taking the adults through the same 5 steps I take the kids with, but once again, with a little bit more adult structure and language. Then the last half of it is the 10 secrets to empower kids and awaken the child in you. And I truly believe that every child is born with all of the traits and characteristics that they need to be successful throughout their life. It's the grown-ups around them as they're developing that literally beat them out of the kids. And, like there's a talk that I do for corporations, which is always very well received. And I call it Back to Your Future. And it's 3 traits that you embraced as a kid, but you have lost that will make you unstoppable in business. The first one is persistence, right? Kids they're naturally born persistent, right? When was the last time you saw a kid quit trying to walk? It just doesn't happen, right? Then they fall down, they may cry, but what do? They wipe themselves off, they get back up, and they keep going. And even if they have some sort of a physical, I guess you could call it like a defect, right? Where they can't necessarily walk, they find a way to locomote from one position to another, right? So that persistence needs to be embraced, and that never give up attitude needs to be embraced and kept throughout your lifetime. The second one is curiosity. Okay. Kids are just naturally curious, right? And they're curious. They're literally at a cellular level built for finding things out, for adventure, for exploration. Okay. So I can't tell you, babies find more loose change and lost car keys than anything else because they're always down at the level where those things fall to, right? Some grown-ups will just kind of get down and look, that's not there kind of stuff, right? So, but they're always, why, what's this? Why is the sky blue? Why is the color, all these different things, right? And that's because they don't have that base of knowledge that the grown-ups think we have. So they're looking to build that base of reality for themselves, okay? And I believe that when a child, really anybody at any age, but when a child loses curiosity, the horizons of their world fold up and become the walls of their box. And then that leads to the third trait, which is ingenuity. And that's kids, kids don't have to learn to think out of the box because they haven't built the box yet in their mind. The best analogy I can think of is there's a reason why a lot of kids would rather play with the box that the toy came in than the toy itself. Because usually that toy, serves like a purpose. It does whatever it does. But the box can be anything, right? It could be, depending on the size, it could be an airplane, a boat, it could be a house, you could make it into a shield. There's literally whatever your imagination can come up with is what it can be. And that's where they naturally go. So if you can put those 3 things together in a business, you're going to have a team that's going to be unstoppable.
Love it. Persistence, curiosity, and ingenuity. And then I know that you do a lot of non-fictional reading about, how to improve, how to refine, and because you have that curiosity and persistence as well, what would you say were some of the either support or resources, because it does take a village to bring our vision to reality, that you discovered that you can share with the Unlost Cause community? It could be podcasts, it could be books, it could be seminars, maybe I'm sure you have a whole litany, but what are your top 3 to 5 that you're like, hey, this is on my short list that it would be worth your while to check out?
Not necessarily in this order in terms of importance, but like the order in terms of which they struck me. So I would say the first one was probably the audiobook, although it's available in print, called Lead the Field by Earl Nightingale. And especially the audiobook, because Earl Nightingale, he had radio pipes. I can't even get down as deep as he did. And when he says the words, they just carry a weight. But there's this line after line that just hit me of like, oh, wow, I never thought of things that way. Or, that's amazing kind of stuff. And I've probably listened to that audiobook at least 10 times. And every time I always pick up something that I didn't get the time before. After that would be pretty much almost anything by Zig Ziglar. Now, his stuff was more when I was in the sales training days, because that's really that was his core constituency, was salespeople. That's what he started off as, and that's who he trained. Okay. But that, once again, the combination of gases for the big boom. One of the things that led to the I am for me was his thing was that a salesman will never out-earn his belief system. So if you think you're worth $20,000, that's what you're going to wind up earning, because that's where you what you believe. So it was that part that I was teaching to salespeople when I started to combine that with some of the stuff from Earl Nightingale. When I the first time I did the Tony Robbins, the Unleash the Power Within, and that's a 3-day long seminar, which is part of that is the firewalk. And I learned so much from that. And that was much more, you're talking like a visual or an auditory or a kinesthetic learner. That was very kinesthetic because you're there and you're actually doing you're doing stuff with your body. Whereas if you're just listening, and I am not a good listener, I've been the first to tell you, it's not so much that I don't try to, it's just things that I hear, oftentimes they just kind of bounce off my head and go off. So once again, my ex used to kind of know that she'd write a note and go, okay, got it. I'll remember to do that on my way home today, because if she told me and I would acknowledge it, it's like, yes, I will absolutely do that. And then I would drive home without doing that and be like, sorry, that's on me. I'll go back out and I'll get it kind of thing. Right. More these days, I'm a big fan of David Meltzer. He's, I don't know if you know his story, but the movie Jerry Maguire is partially based on him. Okay. And that he ran the Lee Steinberg agency. And basically he was worth like over $200 million, literally lost everything and then built his way back up. And he has a very similar mission to me in terms of is that he wants to worldwide impact the lives of 1 billion people. And he's a big supporter of the whole I am concept that I'm teaching. And I've actually connected with him and we're talking about some ways that we might be able to take what he does down to kids and, some ways we might be able to do some things together. But like I said, I listen to his podcast on a regular basis. I'm trying to think if there's, give me a second. I'm having a hard time coming up with his name. The Buy Back Your Time guy who hold on a second. It's right over here. Dan Martell. Okay. So you can tell I keep everything with all the important information within hand's reach. Yeah, Dan Martell, he's less personal development, but he's more of like a systems, a structure guy. And when I read through that, I was like, oh, that makes complete sense. That's amazing. And how to be able to scale and to be able to pass things off and delegate that sometimes in the past I would have been hesitant to do because I don't know if it was going to be done as well as I would do it. But one of the lines from the book is that something done 80% as well by somebody else is better than not done by you. Because I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You can always tweak it afterwards. So
yeah,
I think those would be my top ones for right now.
No, that's great. Thanks for sharing with the audience. And Mark, now that you're fully leaned in and turning this lost cause into unlost cause, how has pursuing this changed the way you see yourself?
I would say it's to a certain extent, it's bringing me back to being me. And what I mean by that is even though I was the one who left the marriage, it was still very painful. And it was in a Zoom meeting, early 2024, like maybe January or so, when somebody, I don't think they meant to challenge me, but they were basically saying that, my energy level wasn't believable for what I was saying. And at the time, I felt like I was bringing it. And that was kind of the verbal slap in the face that I needed, the saying that, okay, yeah, if you're going to do this, you have to do it. You have to literally garner up all of the strength and energy and everything that's within you, because that's what that's what they get. They get the energy from you. If you and I were talking like that, having this conversation, and I was just kind of like, yeah. So this is great. For kids, it's really cool. Right? People are going to be like, kind of thing. And that was the pattern interrupt that I needed to get me restarted, I guess you could say, reignited.
As you're going down this journey, what hope do you have for your kids and maybe future grandkids to take away from your story when they recount it later on?
Well, I do have grandkids. So I have three already, with a fourth coming in October. So I'm very excited about that. And I think to a certain extent, I want them to take or remember just dad or grandpa being who I am. That means that they all know that I would lay down my life for any of them, kind of thing. that anytime that they truly need me, that they can count on me. If they just want me, it'll depend on the situation. Because once again, being that filter, not that shield kind of thing, that I may be like, okay, well, figure that out for you. You're gonna have to figure that one out for yourself because I can't help you on that one right now, kind of stuff, right? But just the success that is starting to come my way and the changes that are happening in my life, that they didn't change me, that I didn't become somebody that I wasn't just because I became successful.
And then what gives you the most joy in what you do?
Seeing the changes. The school program is done with media because I didn't want a limiting factor of how many kids we could reach, be how many places I could go in a day or people I could train to go someplace in a day. But I do go and speak at schools and I'll do some live stuff. And it's when you see kids or adults, but mainly the kids is the part that really impacts me. You can just kind of see them just kind of closed off and just the anger and the stuff like that. And then at the end of the day, when we go through and we celebrate the new identity that they've created for themselves, just like light bulbs, they're just lit up and just so energetic. I mean, there again, more goosebumps kind of stuff. That I couldn't charge enough to get feeling that I get when seeing. That's what it's all about.
And how many years has this been in the school system? And the reason why I asked Mark is, how old is like the first few cohorts, and have you gotten like longitudinal feedback like, wow, that program I went through still has an impact on me today, or changed the course or changed my trajectory?
So I have a partial answer to that. So unbeknownst to me in the brilliance of that night, we talked about animation. At the time, I did not know that animation is the single most time-consuming, and especially back then, expensive way of creating video. And then when you start talking about me in live action interacting with the animated characters, that delayed it even longer. Okay. So we finally got a version of the program that was, when I say I'm not happy with it, I'm happy with the content. I'm not happy with the look and feel of it. Okay. Because we had to have it animated by animation students. So it's not the quality that we're going to be releasing once our funding comes through. And that's the first thing we're going to do is redo the school program. Okay. So now the results that we got were really good results. Is that over about 40% of the kids in class grades increased. So we had C students moving up to B, et cetera. For privacy reasons, we never did get like testing, the standardized test scores to see if those went up. Okay. And what was even more impressive that they were surprised by was that the disciplinary actions went down by, in some cases, up to 60%. Okay. Because all they had to do was basically remind them that are they being true to the identity that they've created for themselves. And they'd be like, yeah, I guess I'm not. Okay. And then they would calm down, et cetera. So we have that data. Now, part of what I was saying before is we've since had to shut down the foundation. Most of our money was coming from grants from the state. They were having literally at certain points, they weren't even making the pension payments for the state employees. That's how bad it was. So we basically we ran out of money. Okay. So our data went from basically 2014 when it first came out to about 2018. And then that's when we had to really shut things down. COVID hit. And then, so now we're relaunching everything. So we have old data, but we're starting to collect a new data now.
Got it. Okay. No, that makes sense. And I know that, you and your foundation, your organization is very outwardly focused, really helping others, not only your kids, but helping other kids. And I also know that I think that the flip side of, self-improvement is sometimes we're our harshest critics. And I know that I have that similar kind of attribute and tendency. So I'm curious, have you given yourself permission to reflect and be proud of what you've done?
Yeah, I'm at the risk of sounding conceited, I think I'm one of the most self-aware people that I know. So, I mean, I understand that I have flaws. I mean, that's part of my identity statement, as a matter of fact, is that, I have flaws and I'm committed to overcoming them so that I'll have even more to give. So, yeah, I do. Like, for example, right now, I'm not taking the time to self-reflect because I just don't have it. But I do periodically just take a deep breath, look around, say, is this where I'm, are things going in the right direction? Is this where I want to be? Am I delivering everything that I can deliver? So I think that's vital for everybody as a person, but also as a business person. Because a lot of times you get so caught up in the business that you start not thinking about ways to make your team better, make the business better. Partnership opportunities could be literally right here in front of you, and you just don't see them.
And then, Mark, for our listeners who, they may have like what they think is a lost cause or a dream, and maybe the embers haven't all gone cold, but they're just thinking like, hey, maybe my time's passed, or maybe I shouldn't take a shot on goal. I'm too old. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough inspiration, whatever those excuses would be. What piece of advice would you say to them?
Depends on how well I know them in terms of the language I would use. You know what I mean? To use an acronym, it might be, this, like, STFU kind of thing. There is no, I don't want to make myself the example, but it really, I guess it comes down to is how much do you believe in what the cause is, right? What does it mean to you? If it's not that important, then you won't find the resources that you need to go after it with the intensity that you would need to make it successful. And maybe you should let it go. But if it's not, if it is something that's like, I know that this is either that this is a great idea or this is the legacy that I want to leave to my kids, my family, to the world, whatever, then don't be a selfish jerk, go after it so that you can actually have that to be able to give to people.
Yeah. And on that note, if you hadn't taken that divine download and actually acted upon it and you were on your deathbed, how would you feel if you didn't take action?
I would say, kill me now. Don't delay it anymore. Just go ahead, give me the pillow, kind of thing.
I love it. And then, Mark, since we're in this community together at Unlost Cause, what ask would you like to make of our Unlost Cause community members?
So here it's I don't want to say so much it's a big ask, but it's big for us. So I'm really proud to say that we've been making a lot of traction in getting this off the ground just in the past few months. Given ideas, we've incorporated right before Halloween of last year. So it's not like we've been around forever. And in that time, we've got our sizzle reel for our TV show, that we've got a streaming service that has said that they want to take it to the next level after our first conversation. So that's in process. We also just recently taped an episode of the show Go Fund Yourself. Okay. And Go Fund Yourself is on the Cheddar Network. If you're not familiar with the Cheddar Network, I said it's a business network, but it's not like Bloomberg or CNBC where it's all about the stock tickers at the bottom. It's more about being in business, about being an entrepreneur and ways to get better. And so we taped an episode, and we are raising our because we're a pre-revenue startup company. So we're raising $600,000 to get us to our seed round. And so I would say, look us up. The episode is first supposed to air on June 5th. And then after that, it'll air a couple more times over that weekend. And then it'll be available on YouTube whenever you want it to be able to find it. So it's watch us. If you think that what we're talking about and our traction is worthwhile, take a look at it, because this is literally like crowdfunding for equity. You can invest as low as $100. So just check us out, give us any comments and concerns. And if you believe in what we're doing enough, go ahead and do that. And I'd be more than happy to tell you how you can do it for yourself if it's something that you wanted to do for yourselves as well.
Great. And then for the listeners who are going to check it out, but they also want to see how the story unfolds, how can the audience support, follow, or connect with you and your mission?
So there's two places. The most prevalent one would be iam4kids.com. So iam4kids.com. So that's where we have all of our online family training programs, et cetera. We talk about the school program. Schools can actually register for it there. You can order my book there, all that kind of stuff. Then there's my speaker site. So if you would want me to come and speak at a school, an event, anything like that, and that's thebegreatguy.com, my moniker. Because believe it or not, markpapadas.com was taken when I went to do that. Who'd go figure? As far as I know, I'm the only one, but maybe somebody, decided to poach it from me or something like that. But so that's why I had to go with the begreatguy.com.
Great. So Mark, your story of resilience, passion, and relentless pursuit is truly inspiring. And to our audience, if Mark's journey resonated with you, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your voice helps amplify these inspiring stories like Mark's. And remember, your dreams aren't lost. They're just waiting for you to reclaim them or claim them now. Mark, thanks again for sharing your powerful journey and invaluable insights with our Unlost Cause community.
Thank you. And always remember, be great.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets, the Unlost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.